Arya Croft thought her biggest problem that night was the hostile takeover threatening her billion-dollar tech empire. Walking through downtown Portland's financial district after a grueling board meeting, the 34-year-old CEO was completely focused on her phone when three masked men cornered her in a shadowy alley behind the Meridian Tower. Her designer heels, diamond watch, and luxury handbag made her the perfect target. What happened next would change everything. Shaw, a 29-year-old single father working double shifts as a hospital custodian, was taking his usual shortcut home when he heard her scream. He had no idea he was about to save the woman who'd unknowingly destroyed his career 3 years earlier. Armed with nothing but protective instincts and skills learned from years of martial arts classes at the local community center, Adine fought off all three attackers. But the real shock came when Arya discovered who her rescuer really was, and what her company had taken from him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain-slicked streets of downtown Portland gleamed under the amber streetlights as Arya Croft stepped out of the Meridian Tower's lobby at 11:47 p.m. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the wet pavement with each determined step, the sound echoing off the towering glass buildings that housed the city's financial elite. At 34, she commanded respect in boardrooms across the Pacific Northwest as the CEO of Quantum Dynamics, a tech company she'd built from a small startup into a billion-dollar empire specializing in artificial intelligence solutions. Tonight had been particularly brutal. The emergency board meeting had stretched on for hours as they discussed the hostile takeover bid from their biggest competitor, Titan Corp. Arya's fingers flew across her phone screen, responding to urgent emails from her legal team while simultaneously coordinating with her PR department to manage the media fallout. The stress was evident in the tight line of her shoulders and the way she unconsciously gripped her black Hermes handbag closer to her body. She'd dismissed her driver hours ago, thinking a walk through the familiar financial district would help clear her head. It was a decision she would soon regret. Lost in the digital crisis consuming her attention, Arya took what she thought was a shortcut toward the parking garage where her Tesla waited. Instead, she found herself turning down a narrow alley between two office buildings, the kind of forgotten urban space where delivery trucks unloaded during the day but became eerily deserted after dark. The first sign of danger came as footsteps that had been echoing her own suddenly multiplied. Three shadows detached themselves from the recessed doorway of a defunct restaurant, their movements coordinated and predatory. The leader, a wiry man in a dark hoodie, stepped directly into her path while his companions flanked her from both sides, effectively cutting off any escape route. Well, the leader drawled, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Look what we have here, a little lost lamb in designer clothing. Arya's blood ran cold as she took in the situation. Her heart hammered against her ribs as adrenaline flooded her system. But years of high-pressure business negotiations had taught her to keep her voice steady even when facing adversity. "I don't want any trouble," she said, her tone firm despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Take my purse, take my jewelry, just let me go." The second attacker, broader and more muscular than his leader, laughed darkly. "Oh, we'll be taking all of that, sweetheart. But first, we're going to have a little conversation about what other valuables you might be carrying. Corporate types like you always have more than meets the eye." The third man, silent until now, produced a knife that gleamed wickedly under the dim alley lighting. The sight of the weapon made Arya's knees weak, and she pressed her back against the cold brick wall behind her, her manicured fingers scraping against the rough surface as she searched desperately for something, anything, that could help her escape this nightmare. "Please," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. This was Arya Croft, the woman who'd stared down venture capitalists and board members without flinching, reduced to begging in a dirty alley. I'll give you everything I have. My watch is worth $50,000. My purse has cash and credit cards. $50,000? The leader whistled appreciatively, stepping closer until she could smell the stale cigarettes on his breath. Seems like we hit the jackpot tonight, boys. Wonder what else Miss CEO here might be hiding. As the three men closed in, their intentions becoming horrifyingly clear, Arya realized with growing panic that her money and status meant nothing in this moment. The corporate armor she'd spent years building, the reputation that opened doors and commanded respect, was utterly useless against the raw violence threatening to destroy her. She was just another victim in a dark alley, and no amount of quarterly earnings or market share could save her now. The leader reached for her diamond-studded watch, his grimy fingers making contact with her wrist, when a calm voice cut through, the tension like a blade. I think the lady asked you to leave her alone. All four heads turned toward the mouth of the alley, where a figure stood silhouetted against the streetlight beyond. From Arya's position, she could only make out a man of average height and build, wearing what appeared to be work clothes and sneakers. Nothing about him screamed hero or savior, yet something in his posture suggested a quiet confidence that made the attackers pause. Walk away, buddy, the leader snarled, though Arya noticed his grip on her wrist had loosened slightly. This doesn't concern you. The stranger stepped into the alley, and Arya could see him more clearly now. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with kind eyes and an unremarkable face that would blend into any crowd. His hospital scrubs suggested he worked in healthcare, and there was something gentle about his demeanor that seemed completely at odds with the dangerous situation unfolding. Actually, he said, his voice remaining unnaturally calm, I think it does concern me. See, I have a young daughter at home, and I'd want someone to help her if she was ever in trouble like this. The knife-wielding attacker stepped forward aggressively. Listen, hospital boy, unless you want to end up in your own emergency room, I suggest you turn around and forget you saw anything. What happened next would replay in Arya's memory for months to come, each detail crystal clear despite the chaos of the moment. The seemingly ordinary man moved with a fluid grace that spoke of years of training, his body shifting from gentle healthcare worker to something far more dangerous in the space of a heartbeat. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that for a moment, Arya wondered if she was witnessing the same person who had spoken so gently about his daughter. Ayan Shah moved with the precision of a master craftsman, each motion deliberate and economical, wasting no energy on flashy techniques or unnecessary force. The knife-wielding attacker lunged first, his blade cutting through the air in a vicious arc aimed at Aiden's midsection. But Aiden was no longer where the blade expected to find him. He had shifted to the left with minimal movement, just enough to let the weapon pass harmlessly by, while simultaneously grabbing the attacker's extended wrist with both hands. The motion that followed was swift and brutal in its efficiency. A controlled twist that sent the knife clattering across the alley floor, while its former owner dropped to his knees, his arm bent at an angle that made all present wince. Stay down, Aiden advised quietly, his voice still carrying that same gentle tone he'd used when mentioning his daughter. Your shoulder's dislocated, not broken. You'll heal if you don't do anything stupid. The leader and his remaining companion exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their situation. The man they'd dismissed as a harmless healthcare worker had just dismantled their armed partner in less than 3 seconds, and neither of them had even seen exactly how he'd done it. 2 against 1, the leader muttered, trying to convince himself as much as his companion. We can take him. They rushed Idan simultaneously from opposite sides, clearly hoping to overwhelm him with numbers and aggression. It was a sound strategy that might have worked against an ordinary person, but Aiden Shah was proving to be anything but ordinary. He dropped low as they converged on him, sweeping the legs of the muscular attacker, while simultaneously driving an elbow into the leader's solar plexus. The larger man hit the ground hard, the back of his head connecting with the pavement with a sickening thud that left him motionless but breathing. The leader, meanwhile, found himself gasping for air as his diaphragm spasmed from the precisely placed strike. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest and wheezing like a broken accordion. "I really don't want to hurt anyone else," Aidin said, straightening up and brushing dust from his scrubs with the same casual air someone might use after completing a routine task. "The police are already on their way. I called them when I first saw what was happening. If you run now, you might get away. If you stay, you'll be explaining this to detectives in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The leader, still struggling to breathe properly, looked at his 2 incapacitated companions and made the wise decision to preserve his own freedom. He stumbled toward the mouth of the alley, pausing only to shoot a venomous glare back at Aidin. Before disappearing into the Portland night, Arya stood frozen against the brick wall, her mind struggling to process what she just witnessed. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes, and this unassuming man in hospital scrubs had dispatched 3 dangerous criminals with the casual efficiency of someone diffusing a minor workplace disagreement. Her hands shook as the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a gratitude so profound it made her knees weak. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Are you hurt? Aidin asked, approaching her slowly with his hands visible, clearly aware that she might still be in shock. His eyes scanned her for injuries with what appeared to be professional competence, though his manner remained gentle and non-threatening. "I know, I don't think so," Arya managed, her voice trembling despite her efforts to maintain composure. "How did you... where did you learn to do that?" A small smile played at the corners of Aidin's mouth. "Community center martial arts classes," he said simply. "Started taking them after my daughter was born. Figured I should know how to protect her if I ever needed to." He gestured toward the 2 unconscious attackers. Muscle memory is a funny thing. Before Arya could respond, the distant sound of sirens began to echo off the surrounding buildings. True to his word, Aidin had indeed called for help, though his own intervention had rendered police assistance somewhat unnecessary for anything beyond cleanup and arrests. "The police will want statements from both of us," Aidin continued, his tone practical and reassuring. "It might take a while. Do you need to call anyone? Family, maybe, or a driver?" Arya realized with a start that her phone had been clutched in her death grip throughout the entire ordeal. The screen showed 17 missed calls from her assistant, her legal team, and her head of security, all wondering where she disappeared. To after the board meeting. "I should probably let my people know I'm okay," she said, her voice growing stronger. "They'll be worried sick." As she began making the necessary calls, Arya found herself studying her rescuer more carefully. Aidin saw she'd heard one of the attackers use his name appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a healthcare worker finishing a late shift. His scrubs were clean but worn, suggesting regular use rather than costume, and there was a hospital ID badge clipped to his chest pocket. Everything about him screamed ordinary, working-class citizen, yet he'd just demonstrated skills that would have impressed military special forces. The police arrived exactly 4 minutes later, their flashing lights strobing across the alley walls as officers quickly secured the scene and began questioning witnesses. Aidin answered their questions with the same calm competence he'd shown during the fight, providing clear, concise details without embellishment or false modesty. He handed over the attacker's dropped knife to the evidence team and gave a statement that was both thorough and remarkably understated. "I saw the lady in distress and intervened," he told Detective Morrison, a grizzled veteran who clearly appreciated straightforward answers. The 3 suspects made threatening gestures. One was armed with a blade, and I used reasonable force to neutralize the immediate danger. "Reasonable force?" Detective Morrison raised an eyebrow as paramedics loaded the still unconscious muscular attacker into an ambulance. "Sir, you put 2 grown men in the hospital and disarmed the third without sustaining so much as a scratch. That's either exceptional luck or exceptional skill." Ayeden shrugged modestly. "I take martial arts classes at the Burnside Community Center. Sensei Williams runs a good program." The police processing took nearly 2 hours, during which Arya found herself drawn into longer conversations with her rescuer than she'd initially expected. As they waited for the detectives to finish their paperwork, Ayeden proved to be surprisingly easy to talk to, possessing the kind of genuine interest in others that was rare in Arya's usual corporate circles. "So you work at Portland General?" she asked, noticing the hospital logo on his ID badge. "Night shift custodial services," Ayeden confirmed without a trace of embarrassment. 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 days a week. "It's good honest work, and the schedule lets me be home when Lovely wakes up for school." "Lovely?" Arya couldn't hide her surprise at the unusual name. Ayeden's entire demeanor brightened at the mention of his daughter. "Lovely Shaw, she's 8 years old, and absolutely convinced she's going to be the world's first astronaut veterinarian, marine biologist." He pulled out his phone and showed Arya a picture of a gap-toothed girl with wild curls and intelligent eyes, grinning at the camera while holding what appeared to be a science fair trophy. This was last month when she won first place for her project on ocean acidification. She's everything to me." The love in his voice was unmistakable, and Arya felt something twist in her chest at the pure, uncomplicated devotion she heard there. In her world, relationships were often strategic, calculated, or performed for public consumption. The authentic emotion Ayeden displayed when talking about his daughter was like encountering a foreign language she'd forgotten she once knew. "Where is she now?" Arya asked, glancing at her watch and realizing it was well past midnight. "Spending the night at her best friend Everly's house," Ayeden explained. "They have these elaborate sleepovers where they build blanket forts and plan imaginary space missions. Mrs. Hayes, Everly's mom, is a saint for putting up with their schemes." He paused, then added more quietly, "It's been just the two of us since her mother passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. These sleepovers give me a chance to pick up extra shifts without worrying about leaving her alone." The simple statement hit Arya like a physical blow. Here was a man who'd risked his own safety to help a complete stranger, who worked night shifts as a custodian to support his daughter, who'd lost his wife to cancer and was raising a brilliant little girl on his own. The contrast between his quiet dignity and the petty corporate dramas that consumed her daily life was stark and unsettling. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, meaning it more than she'd meant most condolences in her life. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Ayeden acknowledged simply. "But Lovely needed me to keep moving forward, so that's what we did. Some days are harder than others, but we take care of each other." Detective Morrison approached them as Ayeden finished speaking, his notebook finally closed and his expression satisfied. "We've got everything we need for now," he announced. "Mr. Shaw, the DA's office will probably want to speak with you sometime next week, but you're free to go. And ma'am," he turned to Arya, "your assistant has been calling the station every 10 minutes. You might want to touch base with your people." As they prepared to leave the alley, Arya realized she had no idea how to adequately thank someone who'd literally saved her life. In her business world, favors were currency, and debts were carefully tracked and repaid. But this situation felt entirely outside those parameters. "Mr. Shaw," she began, then stopped herself. "Ayeden, I don't know how to thank you for what you did tonight. If there's anything I can do, anything at all." "No thanks necessary," Ayeden replied with a smile that made him look younger than his years. "Like I told the officer, I have a daughter. I'd want someone to help her if she was ever in trouble." "Still," Arya persisted, pulling a business card from her purse. "Please, If you or Lovely ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. I mean that. Whedon accepted the card politely, glancing at it briefly before slipping it into his pocket. If he was impressed by her title or company name, he didn't show it. I appreciate that, Miss Croft. I hope the rest of your evening goes more smoothly. As Arya watched him walk away into the pre-dawn Portland streets, she found herself wondering about the man who'd saved her life. What kind of person worked as a hospital custodian, but fought like a trained bodyguard? How did someone maintain such grace and kindness while dealing with personal tragedy and financial struggles? And why did she feel like she just encountered something rare and valuable that she didn't fully understand? Her driver arrived 20 minutes later, full of apologies and concern, but Arya barely heard his worried questions. She spent the ride back to her penthouse apartment, staring out at the city lights and thinking about gap-toothed smiles, blanket fort sleepovers, and the quiet strength of a man who'd risked everything for a stranger, simply because it was the right thing to do. That night, Arya Croft, CEO of a billion-dollar company, master of complex negotiations, and commander of hundreds of employees, fell asleep thinking about the gentle way Aiden Shaw had spoken about his daughter, and wondering when she'd last felt that kind of uncomplicated love for anything or anyone in her own carefully constructed life. 3 days passed before curiosity finally overcame Arya's usual professional discretion. She'd found herself thinking about Aiden Shaw at the most unexpected moments during board meetings, while reviewing quarterly projections, even while negotiating the final terms of a major acquisition. The image of him moving with such lethal precision, followed immediately by his gentle smile when discussing his daughter, created a cognitive dissonance that her analytical mind couldn't resolve. Finally, during a rare quiet moment in her corner office overlooking the Willamette River, Arya did what she always did when faced with incomplete information. She researched. A few discreet inquiries to her head of human resources, combined with some careful database searches, began to paint a picture that made her stomach drop with each new detail. Aiden Michael Shaw, age 29, had indeed worked at Portland General Hospital for the past 3 years as a custodial services employee. But before that, according to his employment history, he'd been a senior software engineer at Quantum Dynamics, her own company. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and she immediately pulled his complete personnel file, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the digital folder. What she found made her lean back in her leather chair, a cold wave of nausea washing over her. Aiden Shaw had been hired 4 years ago as a mid-level programmer with impressive credentials from Portland State University and several smaller tech firms. His performance reviews were exemplary, filled with praise for his innovative thinking, collaborative spirit, and exceptional problem-solving abilities. His supervisor had recommended him for promotion to lead developer on multiple occasions. Then, 3 years ago, everything had changed. The file showed a series of increasingly desperate requests for flexible scheduling and family leave following his wife Sarah's cancer diagnosis. Aiden had asked to work remotely during her chemotherapy appointments, to adjust his hours around medical treatments, and to take extended unpaid leave during her final weeks. Each request had been denied by the department head at the time, Gerald Morrison, who had cited company policy about maintaining team cohesion and demonstrating commitment to corporate objectives. The final entry in Aiden's file was a termination notice, dated just 6 weeks after his wife's death. The reason given was excessive absenteeism and failure to meet performance standards during a critical project phase. Reading between the lines, Arya could see what had really happened. A grieving husband and new single father had been fired for missing work while caring for his dying wife and traumatized daughter. But the most damning detail was at the bottom of the termination paperwork. The decision had been approved and signed by the CEO, at the time Arya herself. She remembered the period vaguely, A chaotic stretch when Quantum Dynamics had been racing to complete a major software launch ahead of a competitor. She'd been working 18-hour days, sleeping in her office, and signing dozens of personnel actions without really reading them. Gerald Morrison had assured her that they were streamlining the workforce to focus on dedicated team members, and she'd trusted his judgment without investigating the individual cases. Now, staring at Aiden Shaw's termination paperwork with her own signature at the bottom, Arya felt physically ill. She destroyed the career of a brilliant engineer during the worst period of his life, forcing him into custodial work to support his daughter. The man who'd risked his life to save her had been ruined by her own careless disregard for the human cost of corporate efficiency. Her hands shaking, Arya continued reading. After leaving Quantum Dynamics, Aiden had applied to several other tech companies, but the termination for performance issues had made him essentially unemployable in his field. He'd taken the custodial job at Portland General because it was the only position he could find that offered health insurance for himself and Lovely, and because the night shift allowed him to be home when his daughter needed him most. The file also contained letters, dozens of them, that Aiden had written to various departments over the past 2 years, politely requesting reconsideration of his termination. He'd never asked for compensation or threatened legal action, merely wanted the opportunity to explain the circumstances and perhaps clear his record. Each letter had been filed away without response, lost in the bureaucratic machinery of a company that had moved on from what it considered a minor personnel decision. Arya's assistant knocked on her door, interrupting her horrified reading. "Ms. Croft, you have the Titan Corp strategy meeting in 10 minutes. Cancel it," Arya said without looking up from the screen. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day." She spent the next several hours making discreet inquiries within her own company, trying to understand how such an injustice had occurred under her leadership. What she discovered was a pattern of callous decision-making by Gerald Morrison, who had systematically eliminated employees he deemed liability risks. Anyone dealing with family crises, health issues, or other personal challenges that might impact their dedication to the company. Morrison had been quietly forced out 18 months later for unrelated ethical violations, but the damage he'd done to people like Aiden Shaw had never been addressed. Dozens of employees had been terminated for reasons that would likely have been considered discriminatory if anyone had bothered to investigate. The weight of responsibility settled on Arya's shoulders like a lead blanket. She was the CEO. Everything that happened at Quantum Dynamics ultimately reflected her leadership, her values, her decisions. The fact that she'd been too busy to read termination paperwork didn't absolve her of responsibility. It made her complicity even worse. As the Portland sun set outside her office windows, Arya made a decision that would have surprised her board of directors and shocked her competitors. She was going to make this right, whatever it took. Aiden Shaw had saved her life, but more importantly, he'd been wronged by her company and deserved justice. The question was whether he would ever trust her enough to accept it. The next morning, Arya arrived at Portland General Hospital at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Aiden's shift was scheduled to end. She'd spent most of the night awake, rehearsing various approaches and trying to anticipate his reaction to her revelations. No scenario she'd imagined felt adequate for the magnitude of what she needed to say. She found him in the pediatric wing, methodically mopping floors with the same quiet competence he'd displayed while dismantling 3 attackers. He looked up as her heels clicked against the freshly cleaned linoleum, surprise and concern flickering across his features. "Ms. Croft, is everything all right? You look like you haven't slept." The genuine worry in his voice made Arya's chest tighten with guilt. Even after what her company had done to him, his first instinct was concern for her well-being. "I need to talk to you," she said, her carefully prepared speech dissolving in the face of his kindness, "about something important. Something I should have known 3 years ago." Aiden glanced around the empty corridor, then nodded toward a small break room. My shift ends in a few minutes. We can talk in there." The break room was a modest space with vending machines, a microwave, and a handful of plastic chairs that had seen better decades. Aiden poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the previous century, offering one to Arya with the same courtesy he might show an honored guest in his own home. "I looked you up," Arya began, then immediately regretted the bluntness of her approach. I researched your background. I found your employment file at Quantum Dynamics." She watched as understanding dawned in Aiden's eyes, followed quickly by something that might have been resignation. He sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs, suddenly looking older than his 29 years. "So you know," he said simply. "I know that my company fired you 6 weeks after your wife died. I know that you were denied family leave to care for her during her final illness. I know that you've been working as a custodian for 3 years because we destroyed your reputation in the tech industry." Arya's voice cracked slightly on the last words. "And I know that I signed the termination paperwork without bothering to read it or understand what was really happening." Aiden stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before responding. "Gerald Morrison told me it was a business decision. Said the company needed people who could maintain focus during critical periods, and my situation made me unreliable." He looked up at Arya, and she was surprised to see no anger in his expression, only a kind of weary sadness. "I tried to explain that Sarah was dying, that Lovely needed me, but he said personal problems couldn't be allowed to impact corporate objectives." "It was wrong," Arya said fiercely. "It was cruel and illegal and completely contrary to everything I thought this company stood for. Gerald Morrison was a monster, and I was too busy and too careless to stop him." "You didn't know," Aiden replied, though there was no absolution in his tone. "CEOs can't micromanage every personnel decision. That's not an excuse. I should have known. It was my responsibility to know." Arya leaned forward in her chair, needing him to understand the depth of her remorse. "Aiden, I want to make this right. I want to offer you your job back, with full back pay, cleared record, promotion to the position you should have had years ago. I want to give you stock options, a signing bonus, whatever it takes to undo the damage we did." She expected relief, maybe gratitude, certainly some sign that her offer meant something to him. Instead, Aiden smiled sadly and shook his head. "That's very generous, Miss Croft, but I can't accept it. Why not?" Arya felt panic rising in her chest. She'd prepared for anger, for demands, for negotiation, but not for outright refusal. "The money? The position? We can discuss terms." "It's not about terms." Aiden stood up and walked to the small window overlooking the hospital parking lot. "Do you know what I do here besides clean floors? I volunteer in the Family Support Center, helping other single parents navigate the system when their kids are sick. I teach basic computer literacy classes for people who can't afford traditional education. I'm part of a grief counseling group for widowed parents." He turned back to face her, and Arya saw something in his expression she hadn't expected. Peace. 3 years ago, you ruined my career and forced me into a job I never would have chosen. It was the worst thing that could have happened to me professionally. He paused, considering his words carefully. It was also the best thing that could have happened to me as a person and as a father. Arya stared at him, struggling to understand. "You're working night shifts as a custodian. You're struggling financially. How could that possibly be better than a career in tech?" "Because when I was a software engineer, I was working 60-hour weeks and missing Lovely's bedtime stories. I was stressed about deadlines and focused on climbing the corporate ladder, and I barely knew my own daughter." Aiden's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Now I'm home when she wakes up. I help with her homework every day. I volunteer at her school, attend every science fair, know all her friends and their parents. I'm present in her life in a way I never was before." He gestured around the modest break room. "This job doesn't pay much, but it gives me something more valuable than money, time with my daughter and the opportunity to help people who really need it. I wouldn't trade that for all the stock options in Silicon Valley." Arya felt her carefully constructed plan crumbling. She'd expected to waltz in like a corporate fairy godmother, waving the magic wand of money and position to solve everything. Instead, she was discovering that Aiden Shaw had built a life of meaning and purpose from the ashes of what she'd thought was professional ruin. "But you could have both," she insisted. "We could arrange flexible hours, work from home options, whatever you need to maintain your priorities. Could we?" Avidan's expression grew skeptical. "When Gerald Morrison denied my requests for family leave, he said he was following company policy about maintaining commitment to corporate objectives. Has that policy changed, or would I just be a special exception until the next crisis requires everyone to prove their dedication?" The question hit its mark with devastating accuracy. Arya realized she was asking him to trust a system that had already betrayed him once, based on nothing more than her promises that things would be different this time. "You're right," she admitted quietly. "I can't guarantee that corporate culture has changed enough to prevent this from happening again. But I can guarantee that I've changed. What happened to you opened my eyes to the human cost of the way we do business." Aiden studied her face for a long moment, clearly weighing her sincerity against his hard-won skepticism. "What exactly are you proposing, Miss Croft?" "I don't know yet," Arya confessed. "But I know that what happened to you was wrong, and I know that you're exactly the kind of person we should be fighting to keep, not throwing away. Give me a chance to figure out how to make this company worthy of employees like you." She pulled out her business card and wrote her personal cell phone number on the back. "Think about it. Take all the time you need. And if you decide to give us another chance, I promise you'll have direct access to me, not middle management who might forget what really matters." Aiden accepted the card, though his expression remained thoughtful rather than convinced. "I appreciate the offer, and I believe you mean it. But I need to consider what's best for Lovely, not just what might be best for my career." As Arya left the hospital, she realized that making amends for past wrongs was going to be far more complicated than she'd anticipated. Aiden Shaw had found dignity and purpose in circumstances that should have broken him, and she wasn't sure she had the right to ask him to risk that stability for the uncertain promise of corporate redemption. But she was certain of one thing. She was going to find a way to make this right, even if it meant fundamentally changing everything about how Quantum Dynamics treated its people. 2 weeks passed before Aiden called the number on Arya's business card. When her phone rang at 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, she was still in her office, reviewing proposals for the Titan Corp merger defense. But she answered immediately upon seeing the unfamiliar number. "Ms. Croft?" "It's Aiden Shaw. I've been thinking about our conversation." Arya's heart rate quickened, though she kept her voice carefully neutral. "I'm glad you called. Have you reached a decision?" "Not exactly. But I have a proposition of my own." There was a pause, and she could hear the sounds of a hospital in the background, distant conversations, the beep of monitors, the squeak of wheels on linoleum. "What if, instead of me coming back to work for Quantum Dynamics, we figured out a way for Quantum Dynamics to do better by people like me?" The unexpected counteroffer caught Arya off guard. "I'm not sure I follow. Your company isn't the only tech firm that treats employees like disposable resources," Aiden continued. "What if we created something that actually helped working parents, people dealing with family crises, employees who need flexibility to handle life's unexpected challenges? Not just at Quantum Dynamics, but industry-wide." Arya leaned back in her chair, intrigued despite her confusion. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A consulting partnership. I help you develop policies and programs that support work-life balance, family emergencies, and employee well-being. You get the benefit of my technical background, and my first-hand experience of what happens when companies get it wrong. In return, I maintain my current schedule and priorities while contributing to something meaningful." The idea was so unexpected that Arya found herself speechless for several seconds. She'd been prepared to negotiate salary, benefits, and position. Titles, not to reinvent how her entire industry approached human resources. "You'd be willing to consult for the company that fired you?" she asked finally. "I'd be willing to help prevent other families from going through what Lovely and I experienced," Aiden corrected. "There's a difference." That conversation led to a series of coffee meetings over the following month, during which Aiden and Arya developed what they eventually called the Sustainable Success Initiative. It was an ambitious program designed to prove that companies could maintain high performance while genuinely supporting employees through life's inevitable challenges. The project started small, with Aiden reviewing existing quantum dynamics policies and identifying the gaps that had allowed Gerald Morrison's callous management style to flourish unchecked. His recommendations were both practical and revolutionary. Mandatory family leave policies that couldn't be overridden by department heads, flexible scheduling options that didn't penalize employees for using them, and performance evaluation systems that considered long-term contribution rather than short-term availability. "The problem isn't that companies can't afford to be humane," Aiden explained during one of their weekly strategy sessions in Arya's office. "It's that they've never calculated the true cost of inhumane policies. When you fire a skilled employee, like me, you lose years of institutional knowledge, training investment, and team cohesion. Then you spend months recruiting and training a replacement who may or may not work out." He pulled out a laptop, a refurbished model that had seen better days but ran efficiently, and showed her a spreadsheet he'd created during his spare time. "I analyzed public data from 50 tech companies over the past 5 years. The ones with the most generous family support policies also had the lowest turnover rates, highest employee satisfaction scores, and strongest long-term growth." Arya studied the data, her business instincts immediately recognizing the implications. "You're saying that treating employees well isn't just ethically right, it's financially smart." "Exactly. But most executives never see these numbers because the costs of poor policy are distributed across multiple departments and timeframes. HR sees the recruitment expenses, managers deal with knowledge gaps, and accounting tracks the training costs. But nobody connects them to the original decision to prioritize short-term productivity over long-term stability. Their collaboration quickly evolved beyond policy review into active implementation. Arya gave Aiden access to anonymized employee data and authorized him to conduct confidential interviews with staff members who'd faced family crises while working at Quantum Dynamics. What he discovered was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Sarah Martinez from the marketing department had nearly quit when her father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but stayed only because a sympathetic supervisor had quietly arranged for her to work remotely 3 days a week. David Kim from software development had been passed over for promotion twice because he'd taken paternity leave after each of his children's births. Jennifer Foster from the legal team had been penalized on her performance review for missing work during her son's leukemia treatments, despite working from the hospital during her boy's chemotherapy sessions. "These are brilliant, dedicated people," Aiden told Arya after completing his interviews. "But they're all one family crisis away from being treated like I was. The policies exist on paper, but the corporate culture still punishes anyone who actually uses them." Together, they developed a pilot program that would test new approaches within selected departments. Aiden insisted on being involved in every aspect of the implementation, despite his non-traditional schedule. He attended video conferences from the hospital break room during his lunch hours, reviewed documents between cleaning shifts, and even gave presentations to department heads at 7 a.m., meetings that coincided with the end of his workday. The initial resistance from middle management was predictable and fierce. Department heads complained about the complexity of accommodating individual employee needs. QESTIONED, the business justification for increased flexibility, and worried that generous policies would be abused by workers looking to slack off. This is exactly the thinking that needs to change, Aiden told a particularly skeptical group of directors during one heated meeting. You're assuming that employees will take advantage of support systems, when the reality is that most people want to do good work. They just need the freedom to handle life's emergencies without sacrificing their careers. To Arya's surprise, Aiden's authenticity and obvious expertise gradually won over even the most resistant managers. His combination of technical knowledge and real-world experience with corporate callousness gave him credibility that no consultant from a prestigious firm could have matched. Within 6 months, the pilot department showed measurable improvements in employee retention, job satisfaction, and productivity. More importantly, they began attracting talented candidates who'd specifically sought out quantum dynamics. Because of its reputation for supporting working families, the success led to company-wide implementation of the Sustainable Success Initiative, with Aiden serving as the program's architect and primary advocate. He negotiated a formal consulting contract that allowed him to maintain his hospital job while working 20 hours a week for Quantum Dynamics at a rate that dramatically improved his financial situation without compromising his availability. For Lovely, you've created something remarkable here, Arya told him one evening as they reviewed quarterly metrics showing across the board improvements in employee satisfaction and retention. They were working in her office after hours, Lovely doing homework at the conference table while her father analyzed data on his laptop. We've created something remarkable, Aiden corrected, then glanced over at his daughter, who was constructing an elaborate volcano model for her earth science class. Though I think our most important project is still figuring out whether baking soda and vinegar can accurately simulate pyroclastic flow. Lovely looked up from her volcano with the serious expression of an 8-year-old scientist. Dad, Ms. Arya knows about business stuff. Maybe she knows about geological processes too. The easy inclusion of Arya in their family dynamic had developed naturally over months of collaboration. She'd begun timing their meetings to coincide with Lovely's after-school activities, had attended the girls' science fair as an enthusiastic spectator, and had even helped with a presentation about women in technology for Lovely's 3rd grade career day. Actually, Arya said, moving to examine the volcano model, I think the key to realistic pyroclastic flow is controlling the viscosity of your eruption mixture. Have you considered adding cornstarch to thicken it? The conversation that followed, involving detailed discussions of volcanic geology mixed with practical advice about science fair presentations, felt more natural and satisfying to Arya than most of her corporate negotiations. Watching Aiden help his daughter refine her hypotheses while simultaneously reviewing employee satisfaction surveys, she realized she was witnessing something she'd never experienced: the integration of meaningful work with authentic family life. Their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper, not romantic, but genuinely intimate in the way that shared purpose and mutual respect create lasting bonds. Arya found herself looking forward to their meetings not just for the business insights, but for the glimpses into a way of living that prioritized relationship and service over status and accumulation. The Sustainable Success Initiative was generating industry attention, with other tech companies requesting presentations about Quantum Dynamics' innovative approach to employee support. Aiden had been invited to speak at 3 conferences, written articles for 2 professional journals, and been profiled in a feature story about corporate responsibility in the Pacific Northwest Business Review. You've become something of a celebrity, Arya observed, showing him the latest article featuring his photograph and quotes about the importance of workplace humanity. Weird, isn't it? Aiden replied with his characteristic modesty. 3 years ago, I was unemployable, and now people want to hear my opinions about corporate culture. 3 years ago, you were already the person you are now, Arya corrected. The only thing that's changed is that people are finally paying attention. The call came at 2:30 a.m. on a Thursday in late October, jarring Arya from the deep sleep she'd finally learned to achieve since reducing her caffeine intake and implementing some of Eden's suggestions about work-life balance. Her phone showed Eden's number, and she answered immediately, knowing he would never call at that hour unless something was seriously wrong. "Arya, I'm sorry to wake you, but I need help." His voice was tight with controlled panic, and she could hear the sounds of a busy emergency room in the background. Lovely's in the hospital. She collapsed at school during recess, and they can't figure out what's wrong. Arya was already reaching for clothes before he finished speaking. "Which hospital?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Portland General. Pediatric emergency." "But you don't need to come, His voice cracked slightly. "I need someone to know where I am. In case something happens. Again, listen to me. I'm already getting dressed. Don't argue with me about this." She made the drive to the hospital in 15 minutes, her high-performance car weaving through the early morning traffic with practiced efficiency. She found Eden in the pediatric waiting area, still wearing his hospital custodial uniform from his shift, his hands clasped tightly in his lap as he stared at the floor. "Any news?" she asked, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside him. "They're running tests. Blood work, CT scan, trying to rule out." He swallowed hard, unable to finish the sentence. "She was fine yesterday. Excited about the Halloween party at school, working on her costume, talking about her volcano project. Then the school nurse called and said she'd fainted during kickball and couldn't wake up properly." Arya had never seen Eden truly vulnerable before. Even during the alley attack, he'd maintained an air of controlled competence. Now faced with his daughter's unexplained medical crisis, he looked like what he was, a terrified single father, confronting his worst nightmare. "Has she been sick recently? Any symptoms you might have missed?" Arya asked, her business-trained mind automatically seeking information and solutions. "That's just it. She's been perfectly healthy. A little tired maybe, but she's been staying up late working on school projects. I thought it was just excitement about Halloween and all her activities." He looked up at Arya with haunted eyes. "What if I missed something important? What if I was so focused on work and trying to balance everything that I didn't notice she was really sick?" "Stop." Arya's voice was firm but gentle. "You're the most attentive father I've ever seen. If there were symptoms to notice, you would have caught them. Sometimes medical emergencies just happen, and it's nobody's fault." Before Eden could respond, a doctor in green scrubs approached them, her expression professionally neutral in the way that medical professionals learn to maintain regardless of the news they're delivering. "Mr. Shaw? I'm Dr. Patterson. I've been overseeing Lovely's case." Eden stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "Is she okay? What's wrong with her?" "The good news is that we've ruled out the most serious possibilities. No brain tumor, no meningitis, no major organ dysfunction. However, her blood work shows some concerning irregularities that we need to investigate further." Dr. Patterson pulled out a tablet and showed them a series of charts and numbers that meant nothing to Arya, but clearly concerned the physician. Her white blood cell count is elevated in an unusual pattern, and there are some other markers that suggest an autoimmune response. We need to keep her for observation and run additional tests to determine exactly what we're dealing with. "Autoimmune?" Eden's voice was barely above a whisper, like what Sarah had. The doctor's expression softened with understanding. "Mr. Shaw, I see from Lovely's file that her mother passed away from cancer. What we're seeing in Lovely's blood work is completely different from any form of malignancy. We're looking at something More like juvenile rheumatoid arthritis or possibly a treatable autoimmune condition. Treatable? Arya found herself speaking before she realized she'd intended to. What does that mean exactly? It means that if our preliminary diagnosis is correct, this is something we can manage with medication and lifestyle adjustments. Lovely would be able to live a completely normal life with proper treatment. Dr. Patterson looked between Aiden and Arya, clearly assuming they were a couple. The next few days will be crucial for determining the exact diagnosis and treatment plan. After the doctor left to check on other patients, Aiden sank back into his chair as if all the strength had drained from his body. "I can't lose her," he whispered. "I can't do this again." Arya reached over and took his hand, not caring about professional boundaries or appropriate behavior. "You're not going to lose her. The doctor said it's treatable, manageable. This isn't like what happened to Sarah. But what if the treatment is expensive? What if she needs specialists, medications that insurance doesn't cover? What if I can't afford to give her what she needs?" The financial panic in his voice was as raw as his medical fears. "I have decent insurance through the hospital, but there are always gaps, always things they don't cover." That's when Arya made a decision that would have shocked her board of directors and probably violated several corporate policies. "Aiden, listen to me. Whatever this costs, whatever she needs, I'll handle it. Specialists, medications, treatments, money is not going to be an obstacle to Lovely getting the best possible care." He started to protest, but she cut him off. "You saved my life in that alley. More than that, you've helped me build something at Quantum Dynamics that I'm actually proud of. Let me do this. Let me help the way you helped me. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, it's family." The words slipped out before Arya could stop it, surprising them both with its accuracy. Over the months of working together, of sharing meals and attending school events, and building something meaningful, they had become family in all the ways that mattered. They spent the next 3 days essentially living at the hospital, taking turns sitting with Lovely while she underwent various tests and procedures. Arya canceled all her meetings, delegated critical decisions to her executive team, and discovered that the world didn't end when she prioritized personal relationships over corporate obligations. She watched Aiden read Harry Potter aloud to his daughter during the long hours between medical procedures, his voice steady and comforting even when Arya could see the fear in his eyes. She witnessed Lovely's incredible resilience as she charmed nurses, asked detailed questions about her medical tests, and declared that having an autoimmune condition would make her like a superhero with a secret origin story. "Will this make me different from other kids?" Lovely asked Dr. Patterson during one of her check-ins. "It will make you someone who understands that bodies are complicated, and that taking care of yourself is important," the doctor replied. "Some of the most interesting adults I know are people who learned early that they needed to pay attention to their health." "Cool," Lovely said with the matter-of-fact acceptance that 8-year-olds sometimes display toward life-changing news. "Can I still be an astronaut, veterinarian, marine biologist?" "Absolutely. You'll just need to take some medicine and see me regularly to make sure everything stays balanced." On Friday evening, as they prepared to take Lovely home with a treatment plan and a collection of new medications, Aiden finally allowed himself to believe that his daughter would be okay. The final diagnosis was juvenile idiopathic arthritis, a manageable condition that would require ongoing medical attention, but wouldn't prevent Lovely from living a full, active life. "Thank you," he told Arya as they waited for the discharge. "Paperwork. Not just for the medical bills, but for being here, for staying. I don't think I could have gotten through this alone." "You'll never have to find out," Arya replied, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in her professional life. "We're family now, whether you like it or not." Looking at Lovely, who was using her tablet to research famous people with autoimmune conditions and seemed genuinely excited about joining what she called the Special Immune System Club, Arya realized that the scared, lonely executive who'd been mugged in that alley 6 months ago had found something she hadn't even known. She was missing a purpose beyond profit and people who mattered more than market share. The first sign of trouble came on a Monday morning in early December, when Arya arrived at her office to find an emergency meeting request from the board of directors scheduled for that afternoon. The subject line was ominously vague: discussion of recent corporate decisions and strategic direction. Arya's assistant, Patricia, looked unusually tense as she delivered the morning briefing. The meeting was called by Harrison Webb himself, she said, referring to Quantum Dynamics' chairman of the board. His office requested all documentation related to the Sustainable Success Initiative, your consulting contracts, and what they're calling non-standard employment arrangements. Cold dread settled in Arya's stomach. Harrison Webb was old-school corporate culture personified, the kind of executive who measured commitment by hours spent in the office and viewed work-life balance as code for laziness. He'd been quietly opposed to many of Arya's progressive policies but had stayed silent as long as the company's financial performance remained strong. Did they say why now? Arya asked, reviewing her calendar and trying to determine what might have triggered this sudden scrutiny. There's been some chatter in the business press, Patricia admitted reluctantly. A few articles questioning whether Quantum Dynamics has become too focused on employee satisfaction at the expense of shareholder value. Someone's been feeding information to reporters about the consulting fees we're paying Aiden Shaw and the cost of implementing family-friendly policies. Arya spent the morning preparing for what she suspected would be a hostile interrogation, gathering data on employee retention, productivity metrics, and cost-benefit analyses that demonstrated the business value of treating workers humanely. But she had a sinking feeling that facts and figures wouldn't matter if the board had already decided to view her leadership as soft or misguided. The boardroom felt unusually cold when Arya entered at 2 p.m. sharp. 8 of the company's 9 directors were present, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly disapproving. Harrison Webb, a silver-haired man in his 60s who still wore 3-piece suits and gold pocket watches, sat at the head of the table with the air of someone preparing to deliver an unpleasant verdict. Arya, thank you for joining us, Webb began with false courtesy. We've called this meeting to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding recent changes in company culture and resource allocation. I'm happy to address any questions about our initiatives, Arya replied, maintaining her professional composure despite the obvious hostility in the room. The Sustainable Success Initiative has exceeded all our projected outcomes for employee satisfaction and retention. Yes, we've seen the internal metrics, interrupted Janet Morrison, the board's newest member and Gerald Morrison's sister. Arya felt her heart sink as she realized the personal nature of this attack. But we've also seen the external coverage, questioning whether Quantum Dynamics has lost focus on its core mission of maximizing shareholder value. Webb pulled out a folder thick with printed articles and financial statements. Over the past 6 months, you've implemented costly new policies, hired consultants with questionable credentials, and diverted company resources toward what some are calling social engineering rather than business development. Our employee turnover is down 30%. Our productivity metrics are up across all departments, and we're attracting top talent specifically because of our reputation for workplace humanity, Arya countered, but she could see that the numbers didn't matter to this audience. We're also spending significant resources on family leave policies, flexible scheduling accommodations, and consulting fees for a man whose primary qualification appears to be his personal relationship with you, Janet Morrison added with barely concealed venom. The personal attack on Aiden made Arya's hands clench under the table, but she forced herself to respond professionally. Aiden Shaw's qualifications include a computer science degree, 4 years of senior-level experience at this company, and demonstrated expertise in organizational psychology and employee relations. His consulting work has generated measurable improvements in every department where it's been implemented. His consulting work has also generated significant media attention about your judgment and priorities, Webb said, sliding a newspaper across the table toward her. This morning's Business Herald includes speculation about inappropriate relationships between executives and consultants, questions about corporate governance, and suggestions that quantum dynamics has become more focused on charity work than competitive business practices. Arya scanned the article, her anger building with each paragraph. The piece was a hit job, filled with anonymous sources making unsubstantiated claims about corporate culture, excessive spending on employee benefits, and implied impropriety in her relationship with Eden. Whoever had fed information to the reporter had been careful to avoid specific accusations while creating maximum damage to both her reputation and the company's. This is a coordinated attack based on deliberately misleading information, Arya said firmly. Someone with access to internal financial data has been selectively leaking details to create a false narrative about our business priorities. Perhaps, Webb acknowledged, but the narrative is gaining traction among investors and industry analysts. Our stock price has dropped 12% since the first article appeared last week, and several major clients have expressed concerns about our stability and focus. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, with board members raising questions about every aspect of Arya's leadership over the past year. They questioned the wisdom of publicly championing family-friendly policies, criticized the resources devoted to employee satisfaction initiatives, and suggested that her personal involvement with Eden Shaw's family represented a conflict of interest that compromised her objectivity. The board feels that immediate action is necessary to restore investor confidence and refocus company priorities, Webb finally announced as the meeting drew to a close. We're implementing several changes, effective immediately. He handed Arya a formal document that felt like a dagger to her chest. The new directives included suspension of all consulting contracts pending review, implementation of traditional productivity metrics that would effectively punish employees who used family leave policies, and reassignment of the Sustainable Success Initiative to a cost-cutting committee charged with eliminating non-essential programs. You're dismantling everything we've built, Arya said, her professional composure finally cracking. You're going back to the same callous policies that drove away talented people like Eden Shaw in the first place. We're returning to proven business practices that prioritize shareholder value over social experimentation, Janet Morrison replied coldly. The board has lost confidence in your ability to maintain appropriate boundaries between personal relationships and corporate governance. Webb's final statement was delivered with the bureaucratic brutality that Arya had come to despise in corporate culture. Arya, you have 30 days to demonstrate measurable improvement in financial performance and investor confidence. If the board remains concerned about the company's direction at that time, we'll be forced to consider leadership changes. As Arya left the boardroom, she realized that she was facing the same kind of systematic attack that had destroyed Eden's career. 3 years earlier, someone with inside knowledge and personal motivation was using corporate politics and media manipulation to destroy everything they'd built together. The question was whether she could expose the real villain before they succeeded in dismantling not just her career, but the more humane approach to business that had become her life's most meaningful work. Arya spent the 3 days following the board meeting in a state of controlled fury, watching helplessly as the company she'd rebuilt began to crumble under the weight of manufactured controversy. The stock price continued to fall. 2 major clients had postponed contract renewals, pending clarification of corporate direction, and 3 talented employees had already submitted resignations rather than work under the reinstated productivity mandates that penalized anyone who dared to use family leave policies. On Thursday evening, as she sat in her office reviewing termination letters and cost-cutting proposals that would gut everything, meaningful about quantum dynamics culture. Her phone rang. Aiden's name appeared on the screen, and she answered with relief at hearing from someone who understood what they were losing. "How bad is it?" he asked without preamble. "Worse than I expected. They're not just rolling back the policies, they're actively punishing people who supported them." Sarah Martinez was written up for excessive personal time because she'd been working remotely 3 days a week to care for her father. David Kim was denied his promotion because of his demonstrated lack of commitment during his paternity leave. Aria's voice cracked with exhaustion and frustration. "It's like watching Gerald Morrison's ghost come back to destroy everyone we tried to help." "That's an interesting way to put it," Aiden said thoughtfully. "Tell me something. Who exactly called for this board meeting? Who provided the documentation they used to build their case against you?" Aria paused, thinking back to the hostile interrogation she'd endured. Harrison Webb called the meeting, but Janet Morrison seemed to have the most detailed information about our initiatives. She knew about consulting fees, specific policy costs, even internal metrics that should have been confidential. Janet Morrison, Gerald Morrison's sister. The connection hit Aria like a physical blow. "Oh my God, I'd noticed the same last name, but I thought it was coincidence. There are plenty of Morrisons in Portland." "Not a coincidence," Aiden said grimly. "I've been doing some research since you told me about the board meeting. Janet Morrison was appointed to the Quantum Dynamics Board 18 months ago, 6 months after Gerald was forced out for ethical violations. She's got an MBA from Wharton and a history of consulting for companies that specialize in what they call organizational efficiency, which usually means cutting costs by eliminating employee benefits." Aria felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place in her mind. She's been planning this the whole time she's been on the board. She's been waiting for an opportunity to discredit me and reverse the changes we made. "More than that," Aiden continued, "I think she's been actively creating the opportunity. Someone's been feeding very specific information to reporters, information that could only come from board-level access to company finances and internal communications. And the timing of these leaks coincides perfectly with Janet Morrison's access to sensitive documents. But how do we prove it? Even if we're right, corporate espionage and media manipulation aren't exactly crimes unless we can demonstrate actual fraud or breach of fiduciary duty." "Leave that to me," Aiden said with a tone that reminded Aria of the man who dismantled 3 attackers in a dark alley. "I may be a hospital custodian now, but I still remember a few things about digital security and investigation techniques. Give me 48 hours. What Aiden didn't tell Aria was that he'd already been investigating for the past 3 days, using skills he'd developed during his software engineering career and connections he'd maintained in the tech security community. The moment he'd heard about the coordinated media attack, his instincts had told him that this was too sophisticated and too well-timed to be organic criticism. Working during his breaks at the hospital and after Lovely went to sleep, Aiden had begun tracing the digital breadcrumbs left by whoever was leaking information to reporters. It was meticulous work, requiring him to analyze patterns in news coverage, cross-reference publication timing with board meeting schedules, and identify the specific sources that reporters were citing in their articles about quantum dynamics. Breakthrough came when he realized that 3 different business journalists had published articles using almost identical language to describe the company's misguided focus on social engineering and excessive spending on employee satisfaction initiatives. The phrases were too specific and too unusual to be coincidental. Someone was providing reporters with ready-made talking points along with the leaked financial data, using techniques he'd learned during his engineering career. Aiden created a comprehensive timeline that showed the pattern of leaks, their correlation with Janet Morrison's access to specific documents, and the financial benefit that would accrue to anyone with advanced knowledge of the stock price manipulation that would result from negative coverage. But Aiden's most damning discovery came when he used his hospital access to Portland General's legal database, a resource available to all employees for personal legal research, to investigate Janet Morrison's business history. What he found there made him understand that this attack on Aria and quantum dynamics was part of a much larger pattern of corporate sabotage. Janet Morrison wasn't just Gerald Morrison's sister seeking revenge for her brother's termination. She was a professional corporate raider who specialized in infiltrating company boards, creating artificial crises that damaged stock prices, and then facilitating hostile takeovers by clients who bought distressed companies at below market values. Her consulting firm, Efficiency Solutions Partners, had been involved in similar scenarios at 4 other companies over the past 5 years, always following the same pattern: gain board access, identify progressive policies that could be portrayed as wasteful spending, orchestrate media campaigns to damage company reputation, and create conditions favorable for acquisition by her firm's clients. The most shocking revelation came when Aiden traced the ownership structure of Efficiency Solutions Partners and discovered that its primary investor was Titan Corp, the same company that had been attempting a hostile takeover of Quantum Dynamics. For the past year, Janet Morrison had been placed on the Quantum Dynamics board specifically to create the internal chaos that would make the company vulnerable to acquisition. Armed with this information, Whedon spent Friday night preparing a presentation that would expose the entire conspiracy. But he knew that simply presenting evidence to Aria wouldn't be enough. They needed to reveal the truth in a way that would be undeniable and public, protecting both Quantum Dynamics and its employees from future manipulation. Saturday morning, Aiden made a phone call that surprised everyone involved, including himself. He contacted Harrison Webb directly, using the personal number listed in the company directory, and requested an emergency meeting to discuss critical information relevant to recent board decisions. "Mr. Shaw, I'm not sure this is appropriate," Webb said when he answered the call. "The board has made its position clear regarding your consulting arrangement with the company. Mr. Webb, with respect, I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say before the board meeting on Monday. What I've discovered affects not just my consulting contract, but the integrity of the entire board and the future of the company." Something in Aiden's tone must have convinced the board chairman, because he agreed to meet at his home in West Hills that afternoon, with the understanding that the conversation would be strictly off the record unless Aiden could provide compelling evidence of wrongdoing. Harrison Webb's house was exactly what Aria would have expected from a traditional corporate executive: imposing, tastefully decorated, and designed to intimidate visitors with displays of wealth and status. But when Webb answered the door, he looked older and more tired than Aiden remembered from company events, as if the stress of recent board decisions had taken a physical toll. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Aiden began as they settled in Webb's wood-paneled study. "I know this is unusual, but I believe the board has been making decisions based on deliberately false information. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Shaw. I hope you have evidence to support it." Aiden opened his laptop and began walking Webb through the timeline he'd constructed, showing the pattern of leaks, the coordination between media coverage and board meetings, and the financial connections between Janet Morrison's consulting firm and Titan Corp. As the presentation continued, Webb's expression shifted from skepticism to concern to outright alarm. "You're suggesting that Janet Morrison has been conducting corporate espionage on behalf of a competitor?" Webb asked when Aiden finished his presentation. "I'm suggesting that Janet Morrison has been systematically manipulating the board to create conditions favorable for a hostile takeover by Titan Corp, the primary investor in her consulting firm," Aiden corrected. "The attack on Aria's leadership and the Sustainable Success Initiative was never about business performance or corporate governance. It was about weakening Quantum Dynamics enough to make it an attractive acquisition target. Webb studied the documents Aiden had provided, his business experience allowing him to quickly grasp the implications of the evidence. If this is accurate, then Janet Morrison has violated her fiduciary duty to the company and potentially committed securities fraud by trading on insider information. It gets worse, Aiden continued, pulling up additional financial records. I traced the timing of the media leaks against stock trading patterns and found that someone with advanced knowledge of the negative coverage has been short-selling Quantum Dynamics stock immediately before each article was published. The profits from those trades exceed $2 million over the past 6 months. The revelation that board decisions had been manipulated for personal profit seemed to genuinely shock Webb, who had spent 40 years in corporate leadership and prided himself on maintaining ethical standards even when pursuing aggressive business strategies. Mr. Shaw, if what you're showing me is accurate, then I owe you and Ms. Croft a significant apology. The board has been responding to a manufactured crisis, and our decisions have damaged both the company and innocent employees. The damage can still be reversed, Aiden said, but only if the board acts quickly to expose the truth and restore the policies that were making Quantum Dynamics a better place to work. Webb was quiet for several minutes, studying the evidence and clearly wrestling with the implications of having been manipulated by a colleague he trusted. Finally, he looked up at Aiden with a mixture of respect and regret. How do you want to handle this, Mr. Shaw? We could present this evidence to law enforcement, or handle it internally through board action, or make it public through media disclosure. Each approach has different implications for the company and for everyone involved. I want to handle it the same way that Aria has always handled business decisions, Aiden replied. Transparently, ethically, and with consideration for how our choices affect the people who depend on this company for their livelihoods. Sunday evening, Aria received a call from Harrison Webb that began with words she'd never expected to hear from the traditional board chairman. Aria, I owe you a profound apology, and I need your help to correct a serious injustice. The emergency board meeting on Monday morning was unlike anything in Quantum Dynamics corporate history. Webb opened the session by announcing that new evidence had emerged regarding the circumstances surrounding recent media coverage and board decisions, and that the company's general counsel would be presenting findings that affected the integrity of board governance. Janet Morrison appeared confident as the meeting began, clearly expecting another opportunity to advance her agenda of dismantling Aria's progressive policies. Her composure began to crack, however, as Webb methodically presented Aguillan's evidence, showing the timeline of leaks, the financial connections to Titan Corp, and the pattern of insider trading that had accompanied the media attacks. This is preposterous, Morrison protested when Webb finished his presentation. You're basing serious accusations on speculation and circumstantial evidence, compiled by a disgruntled consultant, who has obvious bias in favor of the current CEO. Actually, Webb replied calmly, we're basing these accusations on documented financial records, verified communication logs, and trading patterns that constitute prima facie evidence of securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The company's general counsel, who had been working through the weekend to verify Aiden's findings, presented additional evidence that removed any doubt about Morrison's guilt. Email records showed direct communication between Morrison and Titan Corp executives about acquisition strategies. Financial documents proved that her consulting firm had profited from advanced knowledge of stock price movements, and phone logs confirmed coordination between Morrison and the journalists who had published damaging articles about Quantum Dynamics. The most damning evidence came when the general counsel revealed that Morrison had been secretly recording board meetings and sharing confidential information with Titan Corp as part of their acquisition strategy. The recordings, which Morrison had intended to use as leverage against other board members, instead provided irrefutable proof of her systematic betrayal of her fiduciary responsibilities. Janet Morrison, you are hereby removed from the board. of directors effective immediately, Webb announced with the authority of someone reclaiming control of his organization. Legal counsel will be filing complaints with the Securities and Exchange Commission and coordinating with law enforcement regarding potential criminal charges. As security personnel escorted Morrison from the building, Webb turned to address the remaining board members, his expression grave but determined. The board owes Ms. Croft and Mr. Shaw our sincere apologies for questioning their integrity and dismantling their valuable work based on fraudulent information. Our immediate priority is to restore the policies and programs that were making Quantum Dynamics a leader in employee relations and corporate responsibility. The formal vote to reinstate the Sustainable Success Initiative, restore Aiden's consulting contract, and publicly vindicate Aria's leadership was unanimous among the remaining board members. But more important than the corporate resolutions was the personal acknowledgement that came when Webb approached Aria after the meeting concluded. "Ms. Croft, I've spent 40 years in business, and I've rarely encountered leadership as principled and effective as what you've demonstrated during this crisis. The board not only supports your continued leadership, but wants to expand your authority to implement the kind of corporate culture that makes companies truly successful in the long term." As news of Janet Morrison's removal and the exposure of the Titan Corp conspiracy began to spread, Aria realized that the attack designed to destroy her career had instead validated everything she and Aiden had been working to build. The truth had emerged not through corporate politics or media manipulation, but through the careful investigation and principled action of a man who had been discarded by the system and had chosen to fight for justice rather than revenge. That evening, as Aria sat in her office reviewing the restored policies and reinstated programs that represented months of collaborative work, she understood that the victory belonged not just to her and Aiden, but to every employee who would benefit from working in an environment that valued their humanity as much as their productivity. 1 year later, Aria Croft stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Portland Convention Center, looking out at an audience of more than 800 business leaders, human resources professionals, and employee advocates who had gathered for the inaugural Northwest Conference on Sustainable Corporate Culture. The event had grown far beyond anything she'd originally envisioned, drawing attendees from across the Pacific Northwest and beyond, all eager to learn about the revolutionary approach to employee relations that had transformed Quantum Dynamics from a typical tech company into an industry leader in both financial performance and workplace humanity. 18 months ago, I was mugged in a dark alley, Aria began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed ballroom. I thought my biggest problem that night was a hostile takeover threatening my company. I had no idea that getting lost in downtown Portland would lead me to find everything I'd been missing in my approach to leadership and life. In the front row, Aiden Shaw sat with Lovely, now 9 years old and serving as the conference's youngest official volunteer coordinator. She'd insisted on helping with registration, name tag distribution, and what she called making sure all the important business people remember to eat lunch. Her juvenile arthritis was well controlled with medication, and she'd recently been accepted into Portland's gifted program for students interested in science and technology. The man who saved my life that night, Aria continued, taught me that the most powerful business strategy isn't about maximizing short-term profits or eliminating costs by treating employees as disposable resources. It's about recognizing that sustainable success comes from creating environments where people can thrive both professionally and personally. The past year had exceeded even Aria's most optimistic projections for what they could accomplish. Following Janet Morrison's removal from the board and the exposure of the Titan Corp conspiracy, Quantum Dynamics had experienced unprecedented growth in both financial performance and industry reputation. Employee turnover had dropped to historic lows, productivity metrics showed consistent improvement across all departments, and the company had received recognition from the Portland Business Journal, the Pacific Northwest Technology Association, and the National Society for Human Resource Management for its innovative approach to workplace culture. More importantly, the success had attracted attention from other companies seeking to implement similar programs. Eden's consulting practice had expanded beyond quantum dynamics to include 12 other organizations, ranging from small startups to established corporations, all eager to learn how treating employees with dignity and flexibility could enhance, rather than hinder business performance. The Sustainable Success Initiative wasn't revolutionary because it introduced new concepts, Aria explained to the attentive audience. It was revolutionary because it proved that companies could maintain competitive advantage while genuinely supporting their employees through life's inevitable challenges. We discovered that the choice between financial success and humane treatment of workers was a false dilemma created by short-sighted thinking and outdated management philosophy. Sarah Martinez, who had been promoted to Director of Marketing 6 months earlier, sat in the third row taking notes for an article she was writing about transformational leadership for the Harvard Business Review. Her father's Alzheimer's had progressed, but the flexible work arrangements at Quantum Dynamics allowed her to balance her caregiving responsibilities with her professional growth in ways that previous employers had never permitted. David Kim, now the company's chief technology officer, had become one of the most vocal advocates for family-friendly policies in the tech industry. His experience taking paternity leave without career penalties had inspired him to mentor other working fathers, and he'd recently launched an industry-wide initiative to normalize parental involvement in the workplace. Jennifer Foster from the legal team had left Quantum Dynamics 6 months earlier, but not because of dissatisfaction with the company culture. Instead, she'd been recruited by the city of Portland to help implement family-friendly policies in municipal government, carrying the lessons she'd learned about balancing professional responsibility with personal needs into public service. The data speaks for itself, Aria said, advancing to a slide showing comparative performance metrics. Companies that implement comprehensive family support policies see average employee retention rates of 92%, compared to industry averages of 67%. They report productivity increases of 28% and customer satisfaction improvements of 35%. Most importantly, they achieve these results while reducing overall labor costs through decreased turnover, lower recruitment expenses, and reduced training overhead. Harrison Webb, who had become one of the strongest supporters of the new corporate culture, nodded approvingly from his seat at the VIP table. The past year had transformed him from a traditional executive focused primarily on quarterly earnings into an advocate for long-term sustainable business practices. He'd recently announced his intention to retire from the Quantum Dynamics board to pursue consulting work helping other companies transition away from outdated management approaches that prioritize short-term profits over long-term stability. But the most significant transformation, Aria continued, wasn't in our financial performance or our industry recognition. It was in our understanding of what business leadership really means in the 21st century. She clicked to a new slide showing photographs from the community outreach programs that had grown out of the Sustainable Success Initiative. Quantum Dynamics now sponsored coding boot camps for unemployed workers, provided technology literacy classes for seniors, and offered internship programs specifically designed for single parents who needed flexible schedules to balance work and family responsibilities. The Burnside Community Center, where Aiden had first learned the martial arts skills that had saved Aria's life, had received a significant grant from Quantum Dynamics to expand its programs for working families. The center now offered after-school childcare, evening adult education classes, and weekend family workshops that brought together parents and children around shared learning experiences. Corporate social responsibility isn't something we do in addition to our business activities, Aria explained. It's integral to our business model. Because we've learned that companies that genuinely care about their communities attract employees who genuinely care about their work. Lovely Shaw raised her hand from the front row, and Arya smiled as she recognized the young girl who had become something of a conference mascot. Yes, Lovely? Ms. Arya, can you tell everyone about the scholarship program? I think the business. People would like to know how helping kids like me helps the company too. The question brought warm laughter from the audience, but Arya treated it with the seriousness that Lovely's inquiries always deserved. Lovely is referring to the future. Leaders Scholarship Program at Quantum Dynamics, established in partnership with Portland State University and Portland Community College. We provide full tuition assistance for students from families affected by medical challenges, workplace discrimination, or economic hardship. She advanced to another slide showing graduation statistics and employment outcomes for scholarship recipients. 67% of our scholarship graduates have chosen to work for companies that prioritize family-friendly policies, and 43% have started their own businesses with similar values. We're not just changing how we do business, we're changing the expectations of the next generation of workers and leaders. The scholarship program had been Aidan's idea, born from his recognition that his own career struggles had stemmed partly from the lack of support systems for working parents in the tech industry. Rather than simply complaining about systemic problems, he proposed creating pathways for people facing similar challenges to develop skills and find opportunities in more supportive environments. Cassie Finch, one of the first scholarship recipients, and now a junior software developer at Quantum Dynamics, stood up in the audience during the question and answer period that followed Arya's presentation. Ms. Croft, I wanted to thank you and Mr. Shaw for creating opportunities for people like me. As a single mother returning to school after my divorce, I never thought I'd be able to afford a computer science degree, or find an employer who understood that my daughter had to come first. The scholarship program didn't just give me financial assistance, it connected me with a community of people who believe that family responsibilities make employees more dedicated, not less committed. The standing ovation that followed Cassie's comments lasted nearly 3 minutes, and Arya had to blink back tears as she looked out at an audience that included dozens of employees, scholarship recipients, and community members whose lives had been transformed by the simple recognition that businesses could succeed while treating people with dignity and respect. During the lunch break, Arya found herself in conversation with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the director of the Portland Medical Center's Family Support Services Department, who had attended the conference to learn about implementing similar policies in healthcare settings. What you've accomplished at Quantum Dynamics has implications far beyond the tech industry, Dr. Rodriguez explained. We're seeing increased interest from hospitals, schools, and government agencies that want to create more supportive environments for employees dealing with family challenges. The model you've developed proves that institutional change is possible when leadership commits to prioritizing people over process. The afternoon sessions included presentations from other companies that had implemented variations of the Sustainable Success Initiative, panel discussions about overcoming resistance to cultural change, and workshops on specific policies that balanced business needs with employee well-being. Aidan led a session on designing flexibility into corporate structure that was standing room only, with attendees taking detailed notes on everything from alternative scheduling options to crisis support protocols. The key insight, Aidan told his audience, is that flexibility doesn't mean chaos, and support doesn't mean lowered expectations. We've learned to design systems that accommodate human needs while maintaining high standards for performance and accountability. He shared case studies from his consulting work with other organizations, showing how companies in industries ranging from manufacturing to financial services had successfully implemented family-friendly policies without sacrificing productivity or profitability. The biggest obstacle to change isn't usually financial constraints or operational complexity, Ayeden continued. It's the assumption that caring about employees as whole human beings somehow diminishes business focus. Our experience proves exactly the opposite. When people feel supported and valued, they consistently exceed expectations rather than falling short of them. As the conference drew to a close, Arya reflected on how dramatically her understanding of success had evolved since that terrifying night in the alley. The executive who had once measured achievement primarily through stock prices and market share now found her greatest satisfaction in stories like Cassie Finch's scholarship journey, Sarah Martinez's ability to care for her father while advancing her career, and David Kim's leadership in transforming industry attitudes about working fathers. The final speaker of the day was Lovely Shaw, who had been invited to share her perspective on how family-friendly workplace policies affected the children of employees. Standing at the podium with confidence that belied her 9 years, she addressed the business leaders with the same directness that had charmed Arya during their first meeting. My dad used to work at a company that fired him when my mom was sick. Lovely began, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. That was really hard for our family, but it taught us something important. Companies that don't care about families aren't good places for anyone to work, even people who don't have kids. She looked directly at Arya, her expression serious and thoughtful. When Ms. Arya started working with my dad to make quantum dynamics better for families, it didn't just help him. It helped me too, because I got to see what it looks like when adults work together to solve problems and take care of each other. The audience was completely silent, captivated by the young girl's perspective on corporate transformation. I want to be a scientist when I grow up, Lovely continued, but I also want to be a mom someday. The scholarship program and the family policies at Quantum Dynamics mean that I won't have to choose between having a career and having a family. That's really important for kids like me who have big dreams and also want to take care of the people we love. As Lovely concluded her remarks to thunderous applause, Arya understood that the most significant legacy of their work wouldn't be measured in quarterly earnings or industry awards, but in the changed expectations of young people who would grow up believing that businesses could be both successful and humane. That evening, after the conference attendees had dispersed and the convention center had returned to quiet, Arya, Ayeden, and Lovely went to dinner at a small family restaurant in southeast Portland, the same type of neighborhood establishment where they'd shared their first meal together 18 months earlier. But everything about their circumstances had changed since that initial awkward conversation between a grateful CEO and a reluctant hero. I've been thinking about what you said in your opening remarks, Ayeden told Arya as they waited for their food to arrive. About getting lost that night leading you to find what you'd been missing. I think the same thing happened to me, but in reverse. What do you mean? Arya asked, though she suspected she understood. When Quantum Dynamics fired me, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered professionally. But working as a custodian, volunteering at the community center, focusing on being present for Lovely, those experiences taught me what actually matters in work and life. When we started collaborating on the Sustainable Success Initiative, I wasn't going back to my old career. I was bringing everything I'd learned about balancing achievement with meaning into something completely new. Lovely looked up from the elaborate castle she was building with sugar packets and napkins. Dad, does this mean you're famous now? Because 3 people at the conference asked for your autograph. I think it means that people are finally paying attention to ideas that should have been obvious all along. Ayeden replied with characteristic modesty. It's not revolutionary to suggest that companies should treat employees like human beings instead of production units. Maybe not revolutionary, Arya said, but apparently it's rare enough to draw 800 people to a conference and generate interest from organizations across the country. The conversation was interrupted by their server, a young woman who recognized Arya from the day's media coverage of the conference. Excuse me, aren't you the CEO who spoke at the convention center today? I saw the story on the evening news about the company that lets people take care of their families without losing their jobs. That's right, Arya confirmed. Do you work somewhere that could benefit from family-friendly policies? I work 3 part-time jobs and I'm a full-time student, the server replied. None of my employers offer benefits or flexibility, so when my little brother was in the hospital last month, I almost had to drop out of school because I couldn't miss work to be with him. It would be amazing if more companies understood that. Employees have lives outside of work. After the server left to check on other tables, Lovely looked thoughtfully at the adults across from her. That lady reminds me of why this work is important. There are lots of families like ours who need companies to be more understanding. As they finished dinner and prepared to head home, Arya realized that the transformation she'd undergone wasn't just professional, it was fundamentally personal. The executive who had once defined herself entirely through corporate achievement now found her deepest satisfaction in relationships and community impact that extended far beyond quarterly earnings. You know what I've been thinking about lately? Arya said as they walked to their cars. That night in the alley, I was completely focused on a hostile takeover that threatened my company. I was terrified of losing control of something I'd built. But the real threat wasn't Titan Corp or any external competitor. It was the possibility that success without meaning would eventually become indistinguishable from failure. And now? Awigan asked. Now I wake up every morning, excited about the work we're doing and the people we're helping. The company is more successful than ever, but more importantly, it's become something I'm genuinely proud to lead. 6 months later, when Harvard Business School invited Arya to teach a semester-long course on sustainable leadership in the modern economy, she accepted on the condition that Aiden would serve as co-instructor. Their curriculum, which combined rigorous business analysis with real-world case studies of companies that had successfully implemented human-centered policies, became one of the most popular electives in the MBA program. Lovely Shaw, now 10 years old and already planning her path through high school advanced placement courses, often accompanied her father to campus when his teaching schedule overlapped with her school breaks. Students in the leadership course grew accustomed to having their most challenging questions answered by a precocious elementary school student who had lived through the transformation they were studying. The thing about sustainable leadership, Lovely told a group of MBA students during one memorable class session, is that it has to work for everyone, not just the people in charge. If your business success depends on making other people's lives harder, then you're probably not as smart as you think you are. The comment, which was recorded and later went viral on social media, perfectly captured the philosophy that had transformed quantum dynamics from a typical tech company into a model for how businesses could thrive while genuinely caring about their impact on employees, families, and communities. As Arya looked back on the 18 months since that terrifying night in a Portland alley, she understood that getting lost had indeed led her to find everything she'd been missing. But more importantly, it had taught her that the most meaningful discoveries often come not from reaching predetermined destinations, but from having the courage to help others along unexpected journeys toward better ways of living and working. Together, the woman who had once measured her worth through stock prices and market dominance now knew that her greatest achievement was the simple recognition that businesses could succeed by treating people with the dignity, flexibility, and support that everyone deserved, not just during crises, but as a fundamental approach to creating sustainable prosperity for individuals, families, and communities. In the end, Arya Croft learned that being saved by a stranger in a dark alley was just the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately save not just her own understanding of leadership, but the lives and careers of countless others who would benefit from the revolutionary idea that success and humanity were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of truly sustainable achievement. 5 years later, the autumn sun streamed through the tall windows of the United Nations Economic Commission building in Geneva, casting golden light across the assembly hall where delegates from 43 countries had gathered for the International Summit on Sustainable Workplace Practices. At the podium, Aria Croft concluded her keynote address to thunderous applause, but her attention was focused on two familiar faces in the front row of the audience. Abidin Shah, now 34 and recognized globally as one of the leading voices in corporate culture transformation, sat beside his daughter Lovely, who at 14 had become the youngest person ever invited to address the UN Economic Commission. Her speech on the next generation's expectations for workplace humanity was scheduled for the following morning, and she'd spent the flight to Switzerland, reviewing her notes with the same methodical precision her father brought to his consulting work. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aria said as the applause began to fade, "5 years ago, a single act of courage in a Portland alley set in motion changes that have now reached 43 countries and transformed the working lives of more than 2 million people. But the real measure of sustainable progress isn't found in statistics or international recognition, it's found in the stories of individuals whose lives have been fundamentally improved by the simple recognition that businesses can thrive while treating people with dignity." The summit represented the culmination of 5 years of work that had expanded far beyond what any of them had imagined possible. The Sustainable Success Initiative had evolved into the Global Alliance for Workplace Humanity, an international consortium of companies, governments, and educational institutions committed to implementing family-friendly policies and employee-centered business practices. Quantum Dynamics, now led by a board that included 3 former scholarship recipients and 4 employee representatives, had become the flagship example of how companies could achieve unprecedented success while maintaining unwavering commitment to employee well-being. The company's market valuation had increased by 340% over the past 5 years, while employee turnover remained below 3% and customer satisfaction scores consistently exceeded industry benchmarks by more than 25 points. But the numbers, impressive as they were, told only part of the story. The real impact was visible in the lives of people like Aleta Rodriguez, the former hospital administrator who had used a quantum dynamics microgrant to start a consulting firm specializing in healthcare workplace reform, or James Park, a scholarship recipient who had founded a non-profit organization providing technological literacy training for unemployed parents. After the formal session concluded, Aria found herself walking through the gardens outside the UN building with Aiden and Lovely, reflecting on how dramatically their lives had changed since that terrifying night in downtown Portland. Aiden had recently been appointed to the advisory board of the International Labor Organization, while maintaining his consulting practice and his part-time position at Portland General Hospital, a job he'd kept not from financial necessity, but because the night shift still allowed him to be present for Lovely's school activities, and because he'd grown to love the community of healthcare workers who had supported him during his most difficult years. "Dad," Lovely said as they paused, beside a fountain decorated with flags from the summit's participating nations, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been walking home that night? If you hadn't heard Ms. Aria calling for help?" Aiden considered the question seriously, as he always did when his daughter asked about the pivotal moments that had shaped their family's trajectory. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But I've learned that the most important decisions aren't usually the dramatic ones that change everything in a single moment. They're the small, daily choices to help when we can, to treat people with kindness, and to believe that things can be better than they are." "That's very philosophical, Mr. Shaw," Aria said with a smile that carried 5 years of shared challenges and achievements. "But I think Lovely's asking whether you believe in fate or coincidence." "I believe in preparation meeting opportunity," Aiden replied. "I'd been taking martial arts classes for years, not because I expected to fight off muggers, but because I wanted to be ready to protect my family if I ever needed to." You were walking through that alley, not because destiny brought us together, but because you'd made the choice to stay late at work, trying to save your company. The coincidence was just two people who were prepared to do difficult things when the situation required it. Lovely nodded thoughtfully, then looked at Arya with the penetrating gaze that had made her a favorite of business journalists and academic researchers studying generational attitudes toward work and family. Ms. Arya, when you speak at conferences, you always talk about that night as the moment everything changed. But what if it had been someone else who saved you? Someone who wasn't a fired employee with a brilliant daughter and revolutionary ideas about corporate culture. The question caught Arya off guard, forcing her to consider alternatives she'd never really examined. I suppose I would have been grateful for the rescue, but I probably wouldn't have learned the lessons that changed everything about how I understood leadership and success. She answered honestly. The transformation wasn't just about being saved. It was about being saved by someone whose story forced me to confront the human cost of corporate decisions I'd made, without thinking about their real-world impact. Exactly, Lovely said with satisfaction. So it wasn't really fate or coincidence. It was about two people who were ready to learn from each other when they met. And that's what makes the work you're doing now so important. You're helping other people become ready to learn and change, even if they never experience a dramatic moment like yours. As they walked back toward the hotel where they were staying, Arya reflected on how Lovely Shaw had evolved from the precocious 8-year-old she'd first met into a thoughtful teenager whose insights often surpassed those of the business leaders and policy experts who sought her father's counsel. Lovely's juvenile arthritis remained well controlled, and she'd recently been accepted into an early admission program at Portland State University, where she planned to study environmental science with a focus on sustainable business practices. Speaking of learning and changing, Aiden said as they entered the hotel lobby, I got an interesting call this morning from the dean of the Harvard Business School. They want to establish a permanent center for sustainable leadership, and they've asked if we'd be willing to relocate to Cambridge to run it full-time. The offer represented recognition of how far their work had progressed from emergency consulting to reshape a single company's culture into a comprehensive academic and practical framework for transforming business practices across industries and cultures. But it also represented a choice that would require them to leave the Portland community that had supported them through their most difficult and most triumphant years. What did you tell them? Arya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. I told them we'd need to discuss it as a family, Aiden replied, glancing at Lovely with the conspiratorial smile they'd developed over years of making important decisions together. After all, this affects all of us, and the people we care about in Portland. Actually, Lovely said, pulling out her phone to show them an email she'd received that afternoon, I think I might have a solution to that problem. The International Youth Climate Action Network has asked me to be their North American coordinator. It's a position I could do from anywhere, and it would involve traveling to different cities to work with young people who are interested in environmental sustainability and social justice. She looked between the two adults who had become the anchors of her world, her expression combining teenage confidence with the wisdom that came from growing up in a family that had learned to turn challenges into opportunities. If we moved to Boston, I could coordinate youth programs on the East Coast while you two establish the center. Then, when I'm ready for college, we could move back to Portland so I can attend PSU and you can continue the work with the community that helped us become who we are. As they discussed the possibilities and implications of the Harvard offer, Arya realized that the most remarkable transformation of the past 5 years hadn't been the international recognition or the policy changes that had improved millions of working lives. It had been the evolution of 3 individuals who had learned to see their personal success as inseparable from their ability to create opportunities for others to thrive. The scared executive who had been mugged in a Portland Ali, the grieving single father who had lost his career while caring for his dying wife, and the precocious little girl who had needed to understand why her family's world had been turned upside down, had all become people whose lives were defined not by what they had overcome, but by what they had chosen to build from the ashes of their individual struggles. That night, as Aria looked out at the lights of Geneva from her hotel room window, she understood that the story that had begun with violence and fear in a dark alley had become something far more powerful. Proof that ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges could choose to transform not just their own circumstances, but the entire systems that determined how millions of others experienced work, family, and the pursuit of meaningful success. Woman who had once defined herself entirely through corporate achievement, now knew that her greatest legacy would be the simple demonstration that businesses could succeed by honoring the full humanity of everyone they employed, and that the courage to help a stranger in crisis could ultimately become the foundation for helping strangers around the world build better lives for themselves and their families. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.